What if death wasn't the end, but just a pause? Right now, somewhere in Arizona, there's a warehouse that looks like nothing from the outside. No signage that tells you what's inside. No hint that behind those walls, human bodies are suspended in tanks of liquid nitrogen at nearly 200 degrees below zero. Not in a hospital, not in a lab from a movie. In a warehouse, sitting quietly, doing something no building in human history has ever done before. And the people inside those tanks aren't patients anymore, at least not by any legal definition you've ever heard. There's something else, something the law hasn't fully figured out how to name yet. A baseball legend is in one of those tanks. So is a man who helped build the technology behind Bitcoin before almost anyone knew what that word meant. Billionaires you'd recognize on site are already signed up, contracts filed, payments made waiting for their turn. They looked at death, the one guarantee every human being on Earth shares, the one thing money has never been able to buy its way around, and they said not yet, maybe not ever. And here's the part that should stop you cold. They might be wrong about everything, or they might be the only ones who saw this coming early enough to matter. Here's why this should bother you, whether you believe in any of it or not. You already know your body will stop. That's not new information. It's the oldest information there is. What's new is that a small, wealthy, technically fluent group of people have quietly decided that stop doesn't have to mean forever. And the plan they're betting on isn't science fiction dressed up in a lab coat. It's a real procedure, a real cost, real companies, with real waiting lists, real staff on call 24 hours a day, ready to move the second someone on their list dies. Somewhere between 200 and 300 people are already in cryonic storage right now, today as you're listening to this. Thousands more are signed up for when their time comes. That number climbs every single year. So ask yourself this early because you'll need the answer by the end, and it might not be the answer you expect. If there was a door out of death, even a narrow one, even one you weren't sure led anywhere at all, would you walk through it? Let's get one thing straight first, because almost everyone gets this wrong immediately, and the mistake matters. It's not freezing. Freezing is what happens to a steak in your freezer. Water inside the cells expands into sharp ice crystals, and those crystals tear everything apart from the inside, cell by cell, structure by structure. If a human body were simply frozen the way you freeze food, whatever made you would be shredded on the way down, no different than a bag of vegetables left too long in the cold. What these companies actually do is something else entirely. It's called vitrification. Picture this. Instead of turning to ice, the body's fluids are drained and replaced with a cryoprotectant solution, then cooled with such precision that they turn to glass instead of ice. No crystals forming, no tearing, just a solid glass-like state that, in theory, locks the microscopic structure of every cell exactly where it was the moment before the cooling began. Robert Ettinger, the physicist widely credited as the founder of the entire cryonics movement, laid this idea out back in 1962 in a book almost nobody outside the field has ever read, arguing that if a body could be preserved intact enough, future science might eventually find a way to reverse whatever killed it. He wasn't a mystic chasing immortality. He was a man doing quiet math on a bet nobody else was willing to place yet, and waiting to see who else would eventually place it too. But here's the catch nobody puts on the brochure, the part that turns this from a plan into a paradox. This procedure only happens after legal death, not before, not during, after, which means the very people trying to escape death have to die first to even qualify for the escape they're paying for. Sit with that for a second. Really sit with it. The process that's supposed to be their way out only opens once they've already walked through the door they're trying to avoid. There's no early exit. No skipping the line. You have to lose everything first, and only then does anyone even attempt to give any part of it back. And speed. Speed matters more here than almost anything else. More than most people realize until it's explained to them directly. The moment a heart stops, a clock starts, and it does not wait for anyone. Every minute that passes before a vitrification team arrives is a minute of cellular damage that no future technology, however advanced, may ever be able to undo. Some cryonics companies now station standby teams near terminally ill patients days or weeks in advance, sitting, waiting, prepared to begin the process within minutes of a legal death being declared, sometimes before the family has even finished processing what just happened. That's not science fiction. That's logistics wrapped tightly around a hope nobody can prove yet. So why would anyone choose this? Why would a rational, successful, otherwise grounded human being spend tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes far more, on a procedure with no guarantee, no precedent, and no fixed timeline for when or if it ever pays off? Because of the gamble sitting underneath the whole decision, quiet and enormous at the same time. On one side, certainty. You die and that's the end of it forever. No second attempt, no appeal. On the other side, a small, unmeasured, unquantifiable chance that somewhere down the line, technology finally catches up to biology and you get to open your eyes again. Most people who sign up for this aren't claiming it will work. They're claiming something narrower, something almost impossible to argue against on paper, that a small chance beats a zero chance every single time, no matter how small that chance actually is. Take Ted Williams, one of the greatest hitters in the history of baseball, a man whose swing is still studied by players who weren't alive to see it. When he died in 2002, his body didn't go to a funeral home. It went to Alcor, the same facility in Arizona still running today, and inside that facility something happened that turned a private family decision into a public spectacle. His son, John Henry Williams, pushed hard for cryopreservation, pointing to a signed family pact, reportedly written on a torn piece of paper, in the middle of a hospital hallway, agreeing that all three surviving family members wanted to be preserved together. His daughter, Bobby Jo Farrell, disagreed completely, insisting her father's actual will called for cremation and fought the decision in court, arguing that this was never what he wanted at all. While that fight played out in headlines, Alcor performed what's called neuroseparation, preserving only the head separately from the body, a common and far less expensive option many cryonics companies offer. The body itself was returned to the family for burial. His head remains in a tank in Arizona to this day, technically legally preserved, still at the center of a family disagreement that was never fully resolved before the case quietly disappeared from the news. Then there's Hal Finney, a name most people outside cryptocurrency have never heard, but one of the most significant figures in the story of Bitcoin itself. Finney was a software developer who, in January of 2009, received the very first Bitcoin transaction ever sent directly from the anonymous creator known only as Satoshi Nakamoto. That single transaction is now one of the most studied moments in the history of digital currency. In 2009, the same year, Finney was diagnosed with ALS, a disease that slowly, methodically shuts down the body's ability to move, then speak, then eventually breathe, while leaving the mind almost entirely intact the whole time. He kept coding for as long as his hands would let him, eventually using eye-tracking software to write when his hands no longer could. Before he died in 2014, Finney signed up for whole body cryopreservation with Alcor, not just his head, the entire body, and wrote publicly in one of his final blog posts about facing death with what he called cheerful skepticism, where the odds of revival were slim, choosing to try anyway because the alternative offered no odds at all. Ray Kurzweil and Peter Thiel, two of the most recognizable futurists alive today, have both said publicly, on record, that they intend to do the same when their time comes. These aren't fringe names pulled from the edges of the internet. These are people who have built careers and fortunes on betting correctly on unlikely things and won. Here's where it gets strange. You'd assume the biggest risk in cryonics is that the freezing fails, that damage happens somewhere along the way, that the body doesn't survive intact, that ice sneaks in where it shouldn't. That's a real risk. It's not nothing. But it's not the actual problem sitting quietly at the center of this entire bet, the one almost nobody brings up out loud, because the honest answer to it is uncomfortable no matter which direction you land on. If decades or centuries from now, scientists manage to revive a preserved brain, repair the damage, restore the mind, wake the body, is that still you, or is it a copy? A reconstruction wearing your memories like a costume, opening its eyes in a body that used to be yours, in a world that has moved on completely without it. Philosophers have a name for this exact problem, and it's older than cryonics itself. It's called the Ship of Theseus. Picture an ancient wooden ship, repaired plank by plank over decades, until every single original piece of wood has eventually been replaced. Is it still the same ship? Most people hesitate right there, and that hesitation is the whole point. Now picture the same question applied to a mind instead of a ship. A mind stopped completely, then reconstructed piece by piece, decades later from preserved material and educated guesswork. The philosopher Derek Parfit spent much of his career on a version of this exact puzzle, using a thought experiment about a teleporter that destroys your body in one location and builds a perfect copy somewhere else. Most people asked to imagine stepping into that teleporter feel an instinctive discomfort they can't fully explain. A sense that something essential might not survive the trip, even if the copy on the other side remembers everything, feels everything, insists it's still them. Here's the uncomfortable part, and it doesn't require any future technology to be true right now, today, as you listen to this. You already aren't identical to who you were 7 years ago. Nearly every cell in your body has been replaced since then, atom by atom, molecule by molecule, and you still call yourself the same person because your memories carried the thread forward, unbroken moment to moment, without a single gap. Cryonics doesn't offer you an unbroken thread. It offers you a gap, a full stop, then maybe someday a start with nothing but preserved tissue bridging the two sides of that silence. Nobody can promise you what happens across that gap. Not Ettinger, not the scientists refining these techniques today. In labs, most people will never see. Not the companies collecting the payments. Nobody can tell you with any certainty at all that the person who wakes up on the other side of that gap is still, in any way that actually matters to you, the one who went under in the first place. And that gap is exactly what future technology would have to close completely. In order for any of this to work the way the brochures imply, 3 things need to happen, not 1, 3, and none of them exist yet in any usable, tested, working form. First, nanotechnology precise enough to repair individual cells, one at a time, correcting decades of ice damage and molecular decay at a scale most current instruments can't even reliably observe, let alone fix. This idea traces back to engineer K. Eric Drexler, who in the 1980s proposed the theoretical concept of molecular assemblers, machines small enough to grab and rearrange individual atoms, the same way a factory assembles a car, except at a scale roughly 100,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. Nothing built today comes close to that level of control. Rolf Merkel, a computer scientist who helped pioneer the public key cryptography now protecting your bank card every time you tap it, has spent decades arguing that molecular repair machines are the only realistic path to reversing cryonic damage, and that this path may still be a century away, maybe longer, maybe never. Second, an artificial intelligence sophisticated enough to reconstruct not just tissue, but neural pathways. The exact wiring that stores who you actually are, your memories, your instincts, the specific strange way you laugh at things nobody else finds funny. This means mapping something scientists call the connectome, the full wiring diagram of every connection inside a single human brain, somewhere around 100 billion neurons, linked by roughly 100 trillion connections between them. To put that number somewhere, you can actually hold on to it. If every single connection in your brain were a single grain of sand, there would be enough sand there to bury a small city. Right now, the most complete map humans have ever produced covers a piece of brain tissue smaller than a grain of rice. And it took years and an enormous amount of computing power to finish. Losing that wiring wouldn't just mean losing information. It would mean losing the very thing that makes revival worth attempting in the first place. Third, a body. Biological, grown fresh from your own preserved cells, or synthetic, engineered to house whatever gets reconstructed from what's left. For someone like Ted Williams, only a head, this problem is far larger. An entirely new body would need to be grown or built from scratch then somehow connected to a repaired brain in a way no surgeon on earth currently knows how to perform. For someone like Hal Finney, preserved whole, the problem shifts instead of disappearing, repairing an entire body's worth of tissue damage, not just a brain's, at the exact same molecular precision. None of these three things are close to ready. All three would need to arrive independently, then work together flawlessly, and succeed on the very first real attempt at reviving a preserved human being, because there is no second chance to fail at something like this. You don't get to try again on the same body, which means every single person in one of those tanks in Arizona right now isn't betting on one breakthrough. They're betting on three separate breakthroughs, decades apart from each other, all landing correctly on preserved tissue that's been sitting completely untouched the entire time, and then hoping on top of all of that, that the world waiting on the other side still wants to bring them back at all. Zoom out far enough, and this stops being a story about a few hundred wealthy people in tanks in a warehouse. It becomes a story about what an entire species is willing to attempt for the first time in its existence, now that the one problem it has never solved, its own ending, finally, for the first time in human history, looks like it might not be permanent. Here's the part that should sit with you the longest after everything else fades. You don't need to sign up for Cryonics to already be living inside this exact same gamble, just at a smaller, quieter scale. Every time you save a voicemail from someone you lost, you're doing the same thing they're doing, preserving a fragment, betting that some piece of a person survives past the exact moment they stopped. Every time you write something down so a version of your thinking outlives the single day you had it, you're placing a smaller, cheaper version of the same bet those people in Arizona are making with their entire bodies, their entire fortunes, their entire remaining certainty. The difference between you and them isn't instinct, it's only scale. You already believe in some quiet way that a part of a person can outlast their ending. Cryonics just takes that belief, strips away the metaphor, and stakes everything, money, body, identity, the whole bet, on whether it's literally true. So no, death wasn't the end for these people, not because they solved it, not because anyone has anywhere ever. It's a pause, held open by nothing more than glass, hope, and three technologies that don't exist yet and may not exist for a very long time. Would you take that gamble? Not the easy answer, the real one. Because if the technology ever does arrive, the hardest question waiting on the other side won't be whether they can bring you back at all. It'll be whether the version of you that walks out is still, in any way that counts, the one that walked in.